guys, it's Soda here, welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing an updated care guide video of bell frogs, also known as the green and golden bell frogs and southern bell frogs, because their care is pretty much the same thing. Now I actually have done a care guide on these guys before, but that was over 2 years ago now, and I've been wanting to make a new updated version of it for a while now, so I thought I would finally do that, because now I've owned these frogs for quite a few years and I know more about them that I can talk about today. So I will be repeating some of the same things that I said in that video, but also adding more to it and some extra things that I've learned while keeping them, because these frogs are really cool. I love them, but I also know that there's actually not a lot of information about these guys online because they aren't super common when it comes to like other countries that aren't New Zealand and Australia. I live in New Zealand. These frogs are an Australian species of frog, but they were introduced to New Zealand a long time ago, so they are one of the only frogs that we can get here as pets. When I was first getting these frogs, I did find it quite hard to find a lot of good information about them online, so that's why I wanted to make this video. I'll be telling you guys everything I know in this video, although maybe I'll forget some, I don't know, but I'm going to try to explain everything. If you do have any questions about these frogs, feel free to comment down below. Keep in mind that I won't answer any questions if it is in regards to other frog species. I only have experience with bell frogs and whistling tree frogs, which are the only frogs we can get here, so I won't be answering any questions about other frogs that I don't have experience with. I'm sure there's plenty of other videos online about other frog species, but this video is just about bell frogs. So first, let's talk about the differences between green and golden bell frog and southern bell frogs, because they're very similar. The care is pretty much the same. The biggest difference would be like their appearance, but they still look fairly similar. So the green and golden bell frog has more gold on it, and they also appear more smooth than southern bell frogs. Southern bell frogs have a pretty distinct green stripe on their back, which green and golden bell frogs don't have. They also have more bumpy looking skin. I also feel like that green and golden bell frogs can appear more bright in color sometimes, but this can also totally depend on the frog, because bell frogs colors do change quite a lot, I've found. So you can house these species together since their care is the same. You just have to keep in mind that all your frogs should be a pretty similar size, because bell frogs are pretty known to cannibalize each other, which honestly I think is the same with every frog species, but it does happen with these guys too. A lot of people don't know that, and that usually ends in a small frog being eaten. So yeah, as long as they're all pretty much the same size, you should have no problems with them trying to eat each other. I've never had it happen, and I've had frogs that have been slightly smaller. I've never had a problem with that. These guys do get pretty big. Now apparently southern bell frogs do actually get bigger than green and golden bell frogs. Currently most of my frogs are pretty similar in size, and I've had them for quite a few years. My oldest being my green and golden bell frog, who is about 6 years old now, and they're pretty big too. They grow pretty fast. I don't know if they're gonna keep growing but to me my green and golden bell frog size isn't that different to my southern bell frogs. That it can also depend on gender though, because female frogs are bigger than males because they carry the eggs, but it's kind of hard to tell the gender with these guys. The best way to tell is by knowing if they croak or not, because males will croak, females don't croak obviously, but honestly I still can't really tell. I've also heard something about like the colors of their thumbs or something, but that's a little bit hard to tell because these guys do change colors, and sometimes it can look darker and other times it can look lighter, so I don't really know how to do that. So yeah, when I'm talking about change color, these guys do change different shades of green, and I see a lot of people get worried when they first notice their frog is completely different color the next day, and they're like, oh my god, what's happening? Is it dying? Why is it so dark? And don't worry, there are several different reasons these guys can change color. They can go from a super bright vivid green to a super dark green and almost black color, and usually this is just due to them blending in with their surroundings, but it can also be due to temperature and even the mood of the frog. So since these guys are an Australian species of frog, they do prefer the warmer temperatures, and during winter, if it does get quite cold in the room that they're in, they do go through a bit of a hibernation kind of period. I don't know if that's really the right word for it because it's not really the same, but it's very similar. I've just noticed that during winter they spend a lot more time hiding. Sometimes they will kind of even bury themselves in the substrate. They go very dark in color, and they can go without food for a super long time. So if that starts happening during the colder months, don't worry, that's just what they do during winter, but they might not do it if your room is kept warm the whole time. You should still be giving them food during this time. It just means like you shouldn't be too surprised if they're not eating as much as usual. Obviously, as long as they're not visibly losing weight, then you don't have anything to worry about. You'll definitely be able to tell if they're losing weight. So when it comes to enclosure, obviously like terrarium is great, tank is great. I have a fish tank for my guys that I've converted into a frog tank, Basically, I just had to create this mesh lid. Basically, I had to create this wooden frame with mesh. It actually was really easy to do, and I highly recommend it if you don't want to get a terrarium. Now, terrariums are easier because they have the front facing doors, but I struggled to find one that was a good size that I wanted, so I ended up just going with a tank. And also terrariums like triple the price of tanks, but I would like to get a terrarium just because it'd be nice to have the front facing doors one day, but I just can't find any that are the same size of my tank. Usually they're smaller or they're like way too big. But yeah, so currently I use a 150 liter fish tank, and this is a really great size. I used to have a 60-70 liter tank, which was fine because I had less frogs and they were younger, but now that they're bigger and I have more, this is definitely a better size for them. So these guys do prefer land more than water, but you should still have a nice water area for them. So currently I just have mostly land with a container of water in the corner, and it's big enough and deep enough so they can swim around in there. I kind of hate the look of having a container in here. I prefer it to look natural and it kind of ruins that, but honestly a container is just way easier and a lot less messy. It's very easy to clean. I did used to have a filter in here, but it ended up breaking, so currently I don't have a filter in here, which means I do have to do more water changes and clean it more. So keep in mind that if you can get a filter for your water area, that probably will be a lot easier for you and keep everything a lot cleaner. Otherwise, you do have to do more water changes, but it's not really a big deal to me. But yeah, they do spend most of their time on land, so you need a nice big land area for them. Now for substrate, I recommend like cocoa fiber. There are a few different types you can get, but the best one I found that's also the easiest one to get is called Critter Crumble. Now I actually used to not like the stuff because the first time I tried it years ago, the pieces were very thick and they were way too big. I didn't like it, but it seems like they've improved, or maybe I just got a bad batch that time because now the ones I get are much better and the pieces are much smaller. So I really like this stuff. I think it's just like super nice. It looks really nice and natural, and it is very safe for them. But yeah, and also it's pretty easy to find this stuff at most pet stores here in New Zealand. I don't know about other countries though. And then on top of the cocoa fiber, I put sphagnum moss, which you can get at like hardware stores. I just think it looks nice, it's safe to use, and you can keep it nice and damp for them. And then you can put live plants in your enclosure if you want to. Live plants always look quite nice because it looks very natural, but using fake plants isn't a bad thing either. It's totally your choice what you want to use. I've used fake ones, I've used live ones. I just prefer the look of live ones, but they can be harder to care for because I'm not very good at caring for plants. Oh, and of course you do need to use the chlorinator for the water in there. Most tap water has chlorine and chloramine in it. Obviously you can check that with your city water if you're not sure, but most of it does. So you do need to always use a chlorinator. Chlorine is extremely toxic to aquatic animals, especially when it comes to amphibians because they absorb water through their skin. So if there's chlorine in there, they're absorbing chlorine into their skin, which obviously is not very good and it could kill them. So I recommend the chlorinator Prime. I trust Prime with all of my animals that need chlorinated water. I would not recommend you use Stress Coat because Stress Coat has aloe vera in it, which is toxic to a lot of animals. I don't 100% know if it has bad effects to frogs, but I know it's extremely harmful to axolotls and that the plant aloe vera is toxic to frogs, so I would assume that Stress Coat would be as well since it does have aloe vera in it. So I would just recommend not using it at all. Like, I know it's unsafe to axolotls, so I don't think it's safe for frogs either. Oh, and of course you should always make sure that you have some rocks, some big rocks in your water area that gives the frogs a way to get out, because if you don't have a way for them to get out of the water, they could possibly drown, especially if they're young froglets, you know. So I definitely recommend that you have lots of big pieces of like driftwood and branches in there so they can climb things. They love climbing things. And also put one under UVB light. Some like little like tunnels and caves and stuff are good too. A food dish. I have one of these like escape-proof food dishes, which actually works better than I thought it would. I mean, it doesn't work for like crickets or anything obviously, but for like mealworms and like soldier fly larvae, it works very well. So I'd recommend that if you can find that. If you guys live in New Zealand like I do, I recommend the website Insect Direct. They sell lots of live bugs on there for pretty good prices, and they also sell the escape-proof bowls. They have like the best crickets and the best soldier fly larvae in my opinion, but I tend to get like mealworms and earthworms from other places. A lot of pet stores here in New Zealand don't sell a lot of live insects, or they're always sold out, or they're dead a lot of the time. So it's best to look on Trade Me, which is the New Zealand website, or join some New Zealand frog groups and people can help you on there as well. Now, UVB light I think is extremely important to have for these frogs, honestly any frogs, but a lot of people aren't aware of how important UVB is, and I do think it's very important that you have that for your frogs. So this is a UVB that I use, and this is the one that I would also highly recommend you use. Now this obviously is if your frogs are kept indoors. If your frogs are kept outside in a pond and they have sunlight, that's different, like that's fine. But if they are kept in a tank indoors like mine is, then they do need a UVB light. I just have mine sitting on top of the mesh because keep in mind that glass does block UVB. So if you're putting on top of glass, it's not going to do anything. Mesh does cut out some UVB, so keep that in mind too. But I do have mine on the mesh because that's pretty much all I can do. I don't want my frogs to escape because they can escape very easily. So make sure you have a good lid. But yes, UVB is very important. Without UVB, frogs can develop metabolic bone disease, which I've seen several times from people who don't realize you need UVB, which I understand not a lot of people are aware of that. I was not aware of it until like a month after I got my frogs. I knew UVB. But yeah, you definitely want to avoid getting metabolic bone disease because that can cause permanent damage in your frog's bones. Now keep in mind you do have to replace your UVB bulb every 6 months because they actually only work for about 6 months. They still produce light for longer than that, but not actually UVB. So keep that in mind. Make sure you write down when you buy it, and then so you can get a new one 6 months later. And then there's heat lamps. So a heat lamp is different to UVB. It produces heat, it does not produce UVB, so it doesn't do anything when it comes to metabolic bone disease. It just produces heat. This is just kind of more of an optional thing, but if you do live in a very cold area, then I would recommend having this all the time. And I do have a heat lamp. I just wanted to try it out and see if it would make any difference with my frogs, see if they would prefer it, and I don't know if it makes a huge difference. I don't think it's totally necessary. So I don't use mine all the time. I mainly just use it if it's a bit cold that day. I think that sometimes the one I use gets a bit too hot, so yeah, I mean it's just an option you can use if you want, and if it does get very cold where you live, since they are an Australian species, they do really like the heat. But I find that the UVB produces an actual like decent amount of heat. Obviously not like a crazy amount, but it does produce some heat. You know, it's hot to touch it, you know. So usually that's enough for my frogs. And when it comes to food, the main food that I like consistently feed my frogs is like mealworms, soldier fly larvae, earthworms, crickets, and flies. But I also like to feed them slaters sometimes, moths sometimes. Sometimes I'll give them some waxworm larvae, just something different. But that is very fatty, so it's more of a treat kind of thing, you know? You can also try locusts. I want to do that one day, but they're a lot harder to come across here. But yeah, they do really love like earthworms. Earthworms are very good for them. Same with soldier fly larvae. Soldier fly larvae is filled with calcium, so it's very good for them. I love giving them like flies and moths because they love chasing them around their tank, so that's really fun to watch, and it gets them moving too. And also breeding your own food helps as well. I breed my own mealworms now and my own earthworms, mainly for my axolotl, but frogs get them as well. So yeah, it makes things a lot easier, so I constantly have food for them. And in case you are unaware, they do only eat live. Sometimes I can get them to eat a dead cricket by waving it around in front of their face, but they do prefer to only eat live food. And not every frog will eat from tongs like my frogs do sometimes, but sometimes they don't. Oh, and it's also a good idea to dust your frog's food with some calcium powder sometimes, just like a few times a week or something, just because calcium is always important for frogs and other animals. And if you're wondering how often you should feed your frogs, I put food in my frog's enclosure pretty much every day, but some days they aren't hungry because they had a big feed, so they can go like a day or two without food. Actually, they can go a lot longer, but you prefer not to leave them too long without food, but they can go a long time without food, and sometimes they can not be hungry for a bit if they had a big feed, so they are kind of more easier than a lot of animals in that way, that you don't have to feed them every day. But I think it's always good to give them some food just in case they are hungry. And usually you can also kind of tell when they're hungry. When mine are hungry, they sit by their bowl and just wait for food to come in. So if they're sitting by their bowl, I know that they want food, or they're still hungry after a feed, so I'll give them some more. Especially because sometimes it's hard to tell if every frog has had food, because sometimes some might come out and some won't. And also, just keep in mind, if you are unaware, you should avoid touching your frog as much as possible. This is the same with all amphibians. It's best to avoid touching them. I very rarely touch my frogs. I might do it just for this video, just to get a good shot or something, but that will be the first time of me touching them in like months, because I very rarely touch them just because I don't need to. Like, it's okay to occasionally just like hold them, or if you need to move them to clean their tank or something, just as long as your hands are damp and they have no like soap or anything on them, then it should be fine. Just try not to do it too often, obviously, because their skin is very sensitive. It won't hurt them to touch them occasionally. Like, a lot of people think they're gonna instantly die if you touch them. It doesn't hurt them to touch them occasionally. You just shouldn't touch them like every day or anything like that, or, you know, yeah, you just shouldn't touch them too much. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Again, feel free to ask any questions about bell frogs and I will try to answer them if I can. Hopefully I didn't miss anything in this video, but I think I covered everything, but I could have missed something, I don't know. But yeah, I think these frogs are awesome pets. I love them. I've had them for quite a few years now, and it's been really cool watching them grow, and I've really enjoyed improving their enclosure. It's changed a lot since my last bell frogs care guide, and I really like how it looks right now, and I just love these guys. They're just so cool. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you'd like to see next on my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!